Oh, it used to be like there. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. AM 1370. Of course, we out of Gary, Indiana. Tommy, what do you Tommy Live, the live drive 2 to 5. Good afternoon, Jackie Wilson. Hey, you should have said about this Barber's Playhouse down in Gary, Indiana. Good afternoon, Jackie.
My pillow never dry. Lonely teardrops. Come home, come home. Just say you will, say you will.
This is 1370 WLTH AM Gary, Indiana.
Just give me another chance for our romance. Come on and tell me that one day you'll return. 'Cause every day that you've been gone away, you know my heart does nothing but burn, crying. Lonely teardrops, my pillow never dry. Lonely teardrops, come home, come home. Just say you will, say you will. Say you will. Hey, say it right now, baby. Come on, come.
Of course, it's Jackie Wilson here on AM 1370 WLTH. Good afternoon, everybody. Tommy Drive live at 5, 2 to 5. Driving live at 5. And how you doing today? Hey, the number to call is 219-885-1371. And today, we're going to talk about some things. And, of course, my brother always gets together and bring me some historical facts. And the things that I like to do is go back and do a little things in my childhood. And start about how we started out in this radio business and what got us started and what was the great influence of it. And I'm going to give you a little historical facts because I work with a lot of great people in this business for a long time. So let me give you a little overview of how we got started in this thing. We came, my family and I, we came from a little town called Roosevelt City, Alabama. We moved to Gary in the 50s. My father had somebody to come down and pick us up in a car and brought us all back here. Can you imagine 5 boys and 5 girls in one little bitty little car? Unbelievable.
Stop.
Yep, I hear it. Marion, what was the name of that station down in Alabama when we grew up as little boys? What was the name of the station? WJLD, right? That's right, WJLD. Of course, I got my brother back in. He brings me all the historical facts. If you can remember, there was a station called WJLD. It was in Bessemer, Alabama. Marion, you remember that? You remember that? You remember when we used to listen to it every day? Bob Umbach. Bob Umbach. You go over and sit down and talk to me. You never get a chance to talk to my brother. And so this will be the first time that I've ever sat down in all these years that we've been in the radio business, had a very live conversation with my brother Marion Williams. And good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Tommy Drive live at 5, and we're broadcasting live. out of 115 West Fifth Avenue in Gary, Indiana. Good afternoon, Brother Marion. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Tommy.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fine, sir.
We had a lot of loving experiences since we've grown up and been little children. Of course, at the time older than Marion.
So what are you talking about WJLD for?
WJLD. You remember the station down on the Highway 12 in Birmingham?
No, it's Highway 11.
That's right, Highway 11. I'm sorry to get Highway 11.
Highway 11 from Birmingham, going from Birmingham all the way into Tuscaloosa.
Right.
Yeah.
Now
Highway 11.
now we lived south of Birmingham, and in between Bessemer.
Well, that's correct. From between Bessemer and Birmingham.
Right.
A little place called Roosevelt City.
City.
Which later became part of Birmingham.
Right, but it was all black.
All black. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, we never knew anything about anybody else.
But, it was quite interesting, Tommy. Walking down Highway 11, as little boys, we used to walk in and watch persons broadcast from WJLD.
Right.
First black-oriented radio station in America.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
First black-oriented radio station.
That's correct.
But they were white guys, though.
That was interesting. They didn't allow blacks to DJ.
Right.
But there were persons playing music there. They call it race music.
They raise the microphone up just a little bit, too.
Okay.
All right.
They call it race music.
They race music.
Yeah, and I guess they called it race music because they didn't want to acknowledge the fact that the origin of the music came from black people.
Yeah.
This was out of the cultural experiences of persons from the state of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Missouri,
Right.
and part of Florida.
Now, when this guy Bob Umbach, there was a white disc jockey,
Yes.
would come on in the afternoon about an hour, half hour, right?
Well, part of it wouldn't give you a full coverage of radio time. They would only give you 2 or 3 hours.
Right, right.
They're very similar to what they did in Gary, Indiana. Don't you recall?
Oh, yeah. But
WWC.
now Chicago was even worse now.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, Tommy, I understand there was a person in Chicago. What was the person named in Chicago?
Al Benson.
Al Benson.
Al Benson.
And he brokered time.
He was broker time. Now, Al Benson was a minister.
Oh, I didn't know that, Tommy.
Yeah. But his last name was Leaner.
Ah, okay.
So since he was a minister and he wanted to go on the air at that time, Marion, they would only let black people come on and do what they call broker the time.
Broker the time. Guess what time they would come on, Tommy?
What time?
Late in the evening.
Late in the evening.
So-
Now, what happened with Al Benson? Now, Al was the godfather to Vivian Carter.
Well, that was a tremendous woman.
Mm-hmm.
And people in Gary do not realize the great impact that Vivian Carter had on the whole recording industry for America.
For America.
As a matter of fact, Vivian preceded
Okay.
Barry Gordy.
She sure did.
And a lot of folk don't know that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Vivian had, I think, close to 60 artists on her recording label.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And guess what? People in Gary don't even know that.
Don't even know that.
Was one of the most influential persons in America as related to music in this country.
Yeah. Was Vivian Carter.
Vivian Carter.
Now here's what Vivian told me. Now I met Al one time. One time. I met him on 14th in Michigan. He and Vivian were together.
Yes.
Now the story goes that Al Benson had brokered this time from this radio station. They would only give him a half hour. Now what happened, Marion, was the blacks were coming up from the South. All right?
That is correct.
And they had no place to get their music exposed in no place. And they couldn't get them on the radio place in any place. So Al Benson brokered this half hour, and I think it might have been on WGES.
Now, what do you mean by broker, Tommy?
That
Explain
means
that.
The broker at the time meant that Al bought the time from the radio station. They wouldn't hire him,
Right.
but they had some dead time.
Oh, they call it dead time.
It was dead time.
The time that he couldn't sell to anybody
No,
else, so they broker it, right?
They brokered it and gave it to Al.
Yeah.
Now, what Al knew was there were a lot of people moving up from the South that wanted to hear music.
What year was that, Tommy? Do you remember?
Oh, I guess Al started broken the time. I'm going to give it close to 48, 49, 50, somewhere in there.
Okay, so that was doing what they call that second migration.
That second migration.
The first migration was after World War I.
That's correct.
The second migration was after World War II.
Okay.
So you're saying during that second migration from those southern states,
Right.
that's when people brought that rich culture from the South, and sometimes they didn't want to even own it.
They didn't want to own it because what happened?
Why they didn't want to
Well,
own
here's
it?
what happened. when people started coming over from South and had a way of life, a way of living,
Yes.
and when they made the transition, the blacks who had come a little earlier with them wanted to disaggregate themselves from
Now, what was that word?
disaggregate.
Disaggregate. What does that mean?
That means they wanted to separate themselves from
All right, so they would call those.
old country ass niggas.
Oh, Tony, don't say that. Nobody wanted to be labeled, did they?
Didn't nobody want to be labeled.
And so all that rich culture that they had in the South,
Right.
they had to get rid of it.
They had to get rid of it.
Otherwise, you were not going to be acceptable in the North.
That's correct.
And so all the things you did as relates to art,
Right.
music, your language,
Right.
your food,
Right.
your religion, all that you had
Don't
to
preach to me, man.
you had to shed it. Otherwise, you're going to be called that old country what?
I'm not going to say it anymore.
Oh, don't say that again on the air. You can't say that.
Now, let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
You know, when we first came up from Alabama, right?
Yes, sir.
The area that we lived in, everybody worked.
Yes, that's correct. Tommy.
Because we were primarily the people where we lived in the area that we lived in. We lived in the suburbs and didn't know it.
Didn't know it at the time.
Didn't know it at the time.
Right.
But everybody worked in the steel mills or the coal mine, or they worked at the Fairfield industry in Fairfield, which was right outside from Birmingham, right?
Correct.
The people there lived in very modern housing that was built by the steel mills. Is that true?
That's correct.
Now, there were a number of areas in Birmingham. There was a place called Westfield,
Yes.
right?
Fairfield,
Fairfield. That was Midfield,
Winona,
Brighton, Roosevelt, Bessemer.
Bessemer.
And all of those was like independent towns who were built around the steel industry. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let's go back to the music when it came up.
Yes.
When the guys came up and they couldn't play their music, right?
Could not play it.
They couldn't play it. And there was you know what the label they had on it?
What was the label, Tommy?
Race music.
It was called race music. Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
So someone had to make it acceptable in order for people to play it.
That's correct.
Do you know the name of the person who probably had the greatest influence in introducing race music to the mainstream?
I'll tell you who was a problem person. I don't know.
Who was that?
Well, the one person that I think that kind of made it palatable
Who was that?
there was a record called Get Out of Your Face, Wash Your Face and Hands.
Was that Big Joe Turner?
Big Joe Turner.
Big Joe.
Right.
Yes.
It was called Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Yes.
And it was initially started by a black guy named Big Joe Turner.
Okay.
But what happened with it, in order to make it palatable, and it was beginning to play a little bit, right? That they had to have somebody else to come out and say who did it.
But the strange thing about it, Tommy, you know, in order to play what they call that race music, there were only 4 black-owned radio stations in the entire United States.
And I can tell you who they were.
I bet you can.
Okay.
You can?
Yeah.
What were they?
There was a station up in Inkster, Michigan.
All right.
WCHB was owned by a doctor named Dr. Bell.
I do recall you.
You remember Dr. Bell?
Yes, sir.
There was another station in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yes.
Okay?
All right.
There was a guy in Huntsville, Alabama that owned those 4 black stations.
Right.
There was another station in Atlanta, Georgia.
And guess where the other one was?
And the only other station north of the Mason-Dixon line, or that was owned by black, was a guy named Charlie Pinkett. It was WMPP.
And it was built by somebody from out of Gary, Indiana.
It was built by a guy named Quintet McDuffie.
They live on 24th and Connecticut Street.
Right.
One of the brightest engineers the person would ever be.
Well, I'll tell you what. We're at AM 1370, WLTH and Gary. You got Tommy Drive live. And the first time since the history that we've been on radio in the whole life is I got my brother Marion on today. Give us a call, 219-885-1371. The number to call is 219-885-1371. We're going to be right back.
Are you playing that race music?
Of the man with the first count on the money. It's the Tommy Williams Drive from 2 to 5. Lock it in.
Hey, we're back. Good afternoon. We got to call it. Good afternoon, caller. How you doing? You on the drive or on the evening drive? How you doing?
Good afternoon, Tommy Courtney and Tamaria.
Hey, Courtney, how you doing?
Man?
Hey, man, got the brothers on. That's what I'm talking about. Now, I can roll with y'all.
Said Brothers Blues, right?
WNPP are working more for people progress.
That's correct.
Yeah, I know all about that. Hey, look, I used to be a runner, man. Vivian Carter.
Oh, you got to be kidding.
And then my Vivian Carter and they had the guy that had the real joint behind Good Old.
The real joint behind Good O's.
No, the real joint behind where Vivian Carter looked. She was on 17 and Broadway.
Right.
And it was the real joint behind it. They called Good Old.
Oh yeah.
Remember Good Old's nephew Sonny?
Oh yeah.
Okay, then hey man, like I used to be a runner with that, you know that little policy game now and graduated the lottery.
Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah, about the slips.
Mm-hmm.
I was just a youngster, man.
Now tell us what a runner was.
You know, and so
what's a runner?
One who would take the slips to and fro them with the little money in the bag and people would play them dream books. You understand? But like those dream books, trying to hit it, you know, what that help for hit for us. See, that's where lottery grew from.
Oh no, you gotta be kidding.
Oh, hey, man, that's where it came from. Just like the skateboard grew from the more roller skates that we turned over with the pop crate.
Yeah.
And you know, with the little flap we made out of the tube and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Courtney, so they cleaned it up and called it the lottery, right?
They call it the lottery.
They call it the lottery today.
The man got lottery.
The lottery.
Yeah, whatever you want to nickname it now.
Well, we know it.
That's where it got its root from.
We knew it as policy. The policy.
And the man was on top of that game was called Clutch Upshaw.
Oh well.
See, them kids, boy, I'm talking about second, and third cousins right there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, man, when y'all was rolling, man, 25th was Broadway.
Oh yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, I mean, when the trolley turned off off Broadway, we was going down 25th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and you talking about the Spaniard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Pippin gave them their style.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Pookie and them and his wife Alice and Carl Range and
P-Call range.
yeah.
He was
working with those down there Church City.
But Courtney.
Yeah.
He had a different name now. Now his name was P-Call range, but you know what everybody called him, don't you? Palmer Lee range.
Palmer Lee Range. Y'all flip that on me, man.
Yeah.
But anyway, with Vivian, and when it got down to her final hour, man, kind of like put a dag in my heart. Doja told me, he said, "Hey, Chris, come ride with me, man." So I said, "What we're going to do?" He said, "Never mind, just come on with me, man." So so I went with him, and we went down there on 5th at this nursing home, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And I saw her there, man.
Yeah, I remember.
In the middle of the carpet, man. Once a child, once a dog, twice a child.
Yeah.
Oh man, put a tear, man.
Well, you know what, Cordy, that's an interesting story about Vivian because Marion and I shared some of the final times with her, and I remember in Chicago, she was living in Chicago. And
you met Okada at, right?
Well, I mean, that was later on. I mean,
yeah. Okada. Go ahead.
But anyway, in the final times, Marion and I used to go to Chicago and see her. And on her wall, she had all kinds of plaques. Marion, tell me what happened.
Well, and Tommy and I had been in Chicago, and we decided to stop by to see Vivian. And at that point, she decided to reminisce about the things that she had done with the recording. She had all of her plaques that she had worn on the wall.
Yeah.
And she said, "Tommy, there are some things that I'm experiencing." And asked Tommy to take all the plaques off the wall and just to give her a little donation and take the plaques. Tommy decided to make the donation but leave the plaques.
No.
Yeah.
Couldn't take those.
Couldn't take them.
No, we couldn't do that.
We couldn't do that.
That'd be like pulling the skin off the back of her hand.
That's correct.
We wouldn't do that.
Wouldn't do that.
She discovered the Beatles, man.
Well, the story that she tells me, here's what she tells me. She tells me that there was a group also with the Beatles, a guy named Frank Ifield that she brought. The record was called I Remember You.
I Remember You.
And yeah, she used to play it on WWCA all the time. And so she told me about that, and she told me what happened with that Beatles contract is that when they started, Courtney, let me just give you a little
Short question, man.
Let me give you a little shorty on this. Here's what happened. See, you couldn't get records played on the radio station
Right.
If you were black and you didn't hit the top 10 or 15 on the Billboard, you remember that?
I remember that, man.
All right, now here's what happened.
I remember that.
Well, you could not go to WLS and get a record player because they wouldn't play it for you.
That's right.
Now, if you got to top 10 in the Billboard and you was black, they probably would play it for you because it hit the Billboard charts. You got it?
Right.
Now, as a result of that, Courtney, they started creating these radio stations, especially in the South, where one guy would own 7 radio stations. You could own no more than 7 radio stations. You could own an AM, an FM, and you could own 1 newspaper, 1 television in the market. That's what happened. Now, there were a couple of groups in the South. There was one guy that was named John McLendon called the McLendon Group. There were 2 McLendons. One was John McLendon that owned KOK, KOKY, WOKJ, WENN. All those stations were within that parameter. So what they did is they hired black disc jockeys to play the music.
Gotcha.
All right?
Some of them Jew boys. Go ahead.
So when they hired the black disc jockeys, what they didn't know, they were selling the advertising, had salespeople that were usually white that sold the advertising to go and for the black people to come to their venue. Okay?
So now they did net code.
No, they do what now about net code?
Yeah, they put the people to be on the front of the cover that would to sell his music.
That's correct. All right.
Put them on there, they wouldn't sell it.
All right, now here's what happened with that. So how the disc jockeys began to make their money, of course they got paid by the radio station.
Yeah.
But the owners were usually white.
Right.
What they didn't know that the black guys knew, that the white people lived in the suburb or someplace way out.
Okay.
And so when the disc jockey lived in the community, he knew what the community wanted.
Gotcha. Clutch man, go ahead.
So that's how the, quote, record hop started to go. Because after each school event, they usually had what they call a record hop, or they had something at a club on the weekend.
Record hop, huh?
That's correct. Now, the black disc jockey used to control that. But when I was in school and at Jackson, Mississippi, working with one of the biggest radio stations in the South, my wife was a school teacher. She only took home $208 a month. Are you listening?
I'm listening all ears.
Now, but at the radio station, when I would go to, let's say, Kent, Mississippi, and do a record hop, we got $1 for each person that came in the door. And our split was 60-40, and you usually have 300 to 400 people come in the door. You do the math.
I got you, man.
Hey, Courtney, I'm going to keep on talking to my brother here. Yeah. We're going to take some more calls here on AM 1370.
Okay, man, I got my ears on and my eyes open, man.
All right.
All right. Good talking to you, Courtney.
WLT, good afternoon. How you doing there?
Well, good afternoon.
Yes. Oh, hey, there.
Hey.
Hey,
Just what are you all doing?
Hello there.
I'm just listening, and, I just come out of Illinois, and I thought I would turn the radio on and hear 2 handsome gentlemen on WLTH.
Right.
Sound like Miss Daisy. Is this Miss Daisy?
Sound like Miss Daisy. Hey,
This is your Miss Daisy.
Miss Daisy, I just talked to your friend.
Yeah. Oh, you talked to him?
Oh, yes. Miss Daisy, you know who your friend is, don't you?
Yeah, he's always
Yes, I know who my friend is.
Your friend, Mr. Bobby Rush.
That's right. When is he coming this way?
I don't know. He was in town this weekend.
Oh, okay.
He was over at in Chicago with Buddy Guy. He was over there. Yeah. Hey,
Well, there was somebody over there.
Yeah. Well, Miss Daisy, I'm glad you called because Marion and I are talking about the radio and what it was like in the back in the days. Now, Marion, you remember on all the radio stations that was on that the format, what was the basic format? It was the format.
Well, the first thing, of course, you would have a gospel.
Gospel in the morning.
Gospel in the morning.
Okay.
And then after gospel, you move out of gospel to some more R&B.
All right.
And then you'd have your afternoon.
Your midday.
Your midday.
But usually in the midday, they had another midday gospel program.
That's correct.
That was a midday gospel program.
And then you went into your drive.
So you went into your midday, then they'll have a noon program.
Noon program.
And then it came back to the gospel, and then the afternoon.
That's correct, Tommy.
That was usually the format.
That's it.
Now tell me that you had a lot of friends that you worked with in Birmingham. Who did you work with?
Well, my experience was in Tuscaloosa.
Okay.
Yeah. I worked at WTUG.
All right.
I was in college at the time.
Mm.
And what happened was that the Mac Linden chain that you talked about,
Right.
once they found that a disc jockey became very popular,
Mm-hmm.
guess what Mac Linden would do?
He moved to another city.
He'd come over and he'd swoop up that disc jockey and move him to his broadcast.
Oh.
But guess what that would leave?
What?
It'd leave a void somewhere else.
Oh, is that how you got in?
And that's how I eased in.
Let's see, we got a caller. Good afternoon, caller. You're on the Breakfast Club. I mean, not the Breakfast Club, but the Afternoon Drive. Good afternoon. How you doing?
You know what?
What?
You just can't get ready for the afternoon.
Yeah, right.
But whatever, every time you're there, it's a good time.
Right.
I don't know what went on and got into our conversation, but anyway, you and Dr. William is doing a great job and everything.
Right.
And I kind of looked for a gentleman on Sunday evening, but I guess the weather was so bad he didn't want to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And all that was good, but the service was very nice.
Well,
That's great.
I want to thank you, Miss Daisy. And you keep
All right, I'll talk to you all next time.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Now, Marion.
Yes, Tommy.
We're going to skip it a little bit. Now, let me ask you this. We were talking about when the people came up from the South, right?
Yes.
And the music they brought was so culturally enriched, and the other blacks would not accept it. You remember that?
I do recall, Tommy.
Now, one of the biggest artists that came up up from the South, that was a guy named Jimmy Reed.
Tommy, I remember that as a little kid over at a place called Prospect in Gary, Indiana. And there was an entertainer by the name of Jimmy Reed.
Right.
And Jimmy Reed would come over on Prospect and entertain his girlfriend.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
I remember that.
But Jimmy Reed was on the VJ label.
Right.
And persons would throw rocks at Jimmy as he would play the guitar in the evening for his girlfriend. But we didn't know that Jimmy Reed was a recorded artist.
Oh, wow.
No one knew that.
Right.
You know, that was when we were in elementary school over at Pulaski and Carver School in Gary.
Right.
That was this guy Jimmy Reed, who was a blues artist.
Mm-hmm. But now let me give you a little historical things about it since I'm older than you are. Now what happened is during after the Korean War, after the Korean War, right?
Yes, that's in the 50, 51, 52, 53.
51, 52. What happened was when the soldiers were overseas, somebody started sending music of the blues overseas.
So what you're telling me, Tommy, now that the black soldiers would get music
Right.
from relatives here in America overseas.
That's correct.
And apparently they were sharing that music with other soldiers who may not have been African American.
You got it. We got a phone call. Good
Okay.
afternoon. Good afternoon. You're on the drive 2 to 5 with Tommy and Marion. How you doing? Hello? Are you there? Freddie? I thought I had somebody on there. Where they going? But anyway, Marion, here's what happened. When the music became so popular, the other soldiers overseas heard the music, right?
That's correct.
And they wanted to start to bring in those people that they had heard this new music that was so culturally enriched until they didn't know what it was.
Yeah, well, that was right after the Korean War, Tommy.
It was Korean War.
Yes.
Now, guess who were some of the guys that went overseas?
Who was it?
Some of the first black artists that went overseas.
Who was the first artist?
There was a guy named Sonny Boy Williamson.
Oh, you're talking about a blues guy.
Right, Sonny Boy Williamson.
Right.
Came out of Arkansas.
Yes.
There was another guy that came out, and I think Floyd talks about him all the time. Name was Memphis Slim.
Ah, I remember that name, Tommy.
Yeah, it was named Memphis Slim. He came
Yes.
out of Memphis, Tennessee. Then there was another lady who headlined the show.
Wow, who was that?
Now, he learned to play the guitar as a result of her style.
Was that a gospel singer?
Yes,
Was that a person by the name of Rosetta?
Rosetta Thorpe.
Rosetta
Didn't it
Thorpe.
rain, children?
Ah, I
Rain
remember
all
that.
night long. Didn't
Yeah.
it rain?
Well, she was tremendous.
She was tremendous. But what happened was that once they went overseas and started playing the music, the people treated them not like segregation, but they treated them with respect.
So what was Rosetta? Was she what country did she go to?
I think they went to Europe, but they
Okay.
went all over Europe.
Okay.
They went all over Europe.
All right.
It was Rosetta Thorpe, Sonny Boy Williamson, Sonny Boy Williamson, Rosetta Thorpe, And I think on one occasion...
Was Memphis Slim part of that?
Memphis Slim was part of that.
Okay.
Now, on one occasion, I think Big Joe Turner might have gone.
Ah.
AM 1370, you with the Williams brothers in the afternoon. This Tommy and Marion. We're on the drive with fire. We're talking about some historical facts that they ain't going to tell you. And then Marion and I are happy to tell you right here on AM 1370. What's the number to call, Marion?
885-1371. That's
you're not doing the
WLT.
show.
Yeah, that number is 885-1371.
All right. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back. We're back on Tommy 2 to 5, the drive that's live. And good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Hey, of course, today this is the first time I've ever done this, and I got my brother Marion on. Marion, now you remember, we got a phone that's ringing all over everywhere. Let me ask you this, Marion. Oh, the phone is ringing. Now, let me ask you this. There was a radio station in Birmingham, Alabama. WENN.
WENN was owned by a person by the name of
A.G. Gaston.
A.G. Gaston. A.G. Gaston was the person who owned most of the funeral homes in the Birmingham area. That was the fifth owned black radio station in America. WENN, with a person by the name of Shelley the Playboy.
Oh, yeah.
And Leaping Larry Daly. Leaping Larry.
Larry came out of Tuscaloosa.
Tuscaloosa, Alabama, left there and went up to Pittsburgh.
No, he went to Philadelphia.
Oh, was it Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's the guy who taught me.
Oh, yeah, that was the person who got you started.
Yeah, Larry Daly.
Leaping Larry.
His name was Leaping Larry, but his name was Robert Woodfield.
Smooth.
Smooth.
Yes.
It was very smooth.
Yes, and Shelley the Playboy.
Yeah. So everybody had those names.
Yeah, there was one called Satellite Papa. now down over there in Jackson, Tommy, it was a little different over there at WOKJ.
Yeah.
That's where you were.
Yeah, I was at OKJ.
OKJ, and it looked like there were some guys over there. Now, who were some of those guys you worked with over at WOKJ?
At WOKJ, the number one guy that I worked with was named Joby Martin.
Well, what about Papa Rock?
Papa Rock.
And there was one guy who worked with me over in Tuscaloosa who later came over there with you for a short time. And later went on to...
That was Bruce Payne.
Was it Bruce Payne?
Yeah, it was Bruce came over.
Bruce was the gospel man, wasn't he?
Was a gospel man.
Right, but there was another guy out of Tuscaloosa.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Who was that?
Brock Easter.
Brock Easter. Is that the guy who had about 10 different voices?
Brock had about 10 different voices. His wife was just Bunny Easter.
Bonnie was tremendous.
Was just as smooth as she could be.
Yeah. And I did the understudy under Brock and Bonnie.
I'm trying to. I think the radio station in Meridian was WQIC.
Yeah, and the one in Tuscaloosa was WTUG.
TUG in Tuscaloosa.
And that's when I was freshman and sophomore at Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, right next to the University of Alabama. And got a call of my sophomore year after you had abandoned me and went over to WOKJ in Jackson.
Right.
Got a call to come to work at WTUG because those guys left and went over to join persons over at OKJ in Jackson.
So
they had gotten a promotion.
That was a big band.
Yeah.
Big band.
Yeah. So they had left me there, but to work at WTUG.
But you know what happens is sometimes when you work for people, especially with this racism thing that was going on. And I was telling you about these guys who were the white owners, and they owned these stations, and they lived some other place. In the afternoon, they left.
Well, that was Jay Gilbert who ran the station at WTUG. At that time, they had, I think, 3 or 4 stations.
Right.
They had another station down in Florida, and another station somewhere over in Alabama, and one in Georgia.
Okay.
But then he ran the one in Tuscaloosa, and it was all black. Oriented radio stations at that time, but it was white owners. They were not black owners.
No, now in America right now there are about 44 black owners?
37, Tommy.
37.
Only 37 left.
37 left.
Yes, and guess what?
What?
I think there are 11 in Mississippi.
11 in Mississippi.
I think there's only one in 2 in Indiana.
And we got how many? 6?
Well, the ones we have here in Indiana, but then we have someone who has one in Indianapolis.
Yeah, that's that Hughes lady, right, Catherine?
Catherine Hughes. Catherine Hughes owns 51.
Now, tell me about this story. Tell the audience about the time when the guy called us and wanted us to take the 51 stations.
Well, I think there was a guy who was president by the name of Bill Clinton. You ever heard of Bill Clinton?
Yeah, I heard about it.
Well, Bill Clinton did something kind of unusual when he became president. You know what he did? He decided to deregulate radio stations. But guess what that meant?
What?
That all the radio stations in America were primarily bought up by a company called Clear Channel.
Right.
Clear Channel bought 1,297 stations.
Wow.
Which meant now that local-owned stations were no longer local-owned. An example of that is most of the stations in Chicago now are owned by 2 or 3 companies. ABC, CBS, Clear Channel, Beasley, Cumulus, and Sinclair. Those are the companies. And so when you get to own one now, it's rare because all of them are owned by large corporations. And so therefore you find that the programming is so different because what they do is they go with only about 7 formats. And this is why you find the music today is the way it is now, which is why you have so much of the music that sometimes is not as favorable to your community as you would like, because they're primarily concerned with selling what they want to sell. And they have the marketing companies and so forth. So therefore, you don't get your message told.
So that's why we can tell our message.
Well, this is why you and I are here telling our story. You know, usually they tell their story. So here's a situation where in Gary people are able to tell their story because, you know, this is what we do. We want you to know your story. So this is why WLTH is where it is today.
All right, we're going to be right back, Marion.
Okay, Tommy.
Okay, AM 1370 WLTH out of Gary, Indiana. Got my brother Marion with me today.
Let's talk to you.
Okay.
You hear the best on radio. Talk, time, temperature, travel, trivia. All the T's equal. The Tommy Williams Show. The afternoon drive, 2 to 5.